Hello, everyone. I'm Captain Logan. It's time for another You Made Me Watch. And this time, you made me watch The Rescuers, the animated Disney feature from 1977. This movie was requested by John McClane on Patreon, so thanks very much to you. This is a movie that, of course, I knew about and probably saw when I was a kid, but could not remember. And as I was watching it, the only elements that seemed familiar to me were elements that are also in its sequel, The Rescuers Down Under. And when I think of this series franchise, it's only got two movies. I think of The Rescuers Down Under, and that's the one that a lot more people talk about. It's one of my wife's favorite animated Disney movies, and it comes up a lot. And so I think of something that is a lot brighter and less gritty and more polished looking than this is. And this is a consummate 70s animated thing for children in a whole lot of different ways, but especially in that grittiness factor, in that it is a real lived in looking world. It's real rough around the edges. It's not trying to look super mainstream. And that's kind of refreshing sometimes, going back to these kinds of properties where they're not trying to be overly accessible and to make everybody happy. They're taking risks. They're not too afraid of scaring children, and sometimes to a fault. Sometimes they'll go too far the other way, I think. But the thing I appreciate about movies like this is it really feels like there's something actually at stake. There's a real sense of danger. And these kinds of pieces, this, American Tail, which is the obvious comparison because they're both Don Bluth. This is while he's still at Disney, but of course he's going to leave to make American Tail later. And that movie is even more gritty, and it has a creepy factor, and is a lot more atmospheric and moody. But movies like this seem to be all about how we live in a cynical and scary world, and a world that is not always the best for children, but it emphasizes how rough and horrible sometimes the world we live in can be, in order to contrast that with the good people that do live in it. So everything works out at the end, but the world itself doesn't look hunky dory, and it's scary, and it's overwhelming, and it's gonna be very often every man for himself, because most human beings are not really looking out for too many other people besides themselves. This movie and Land Before Time, and movies like that. I guess that was early '80s, but it also kind of has this quality, and I think this theme of self-preservation, of people, of a lot of people, and animals, of course, and we personify animals, I think, partly to make this point, are looking out for themselves. And even if they try to keep their heart in the right place, and they don't mean to step on the little people, as it were, it is kind of a dog-eat-dog world. And at the same time, there are selfless people in that world as well. And so I think the point for children is supposed to be, this is the world outside, but you can rest easy a little bit in knowing that there are what Fred Rogers called the helpers, and you should always look for the helpers. So as bleak and relentless as the world can be, there is still reason to have hope. And I always appreciated as a kid seeing things like this, because it didn't it doesn't feel Disney-fied, and it is a Disney movie, but when I think of Disney-fied films, I think of stuff that came after this, where it just seems like everything is kind of always okay, and we really water stories down. And with what little research I did about the original source material, the books that this movie is based on, there is a little bit of stuff being watered down in that that starts with some political undertones that this movie doesn't have, but that was avoided because Walt Disney didn't really want that in his movies. And so when they finally got around to making this, because he ended up vetoing this as a project years before it came out, and then when it finally did come out, they just adapted different material because this was a book series and for children, and there were several of them, and so they just avoided the one that was about a totalitarian dictatorship. And so it's I guess it's watered down in the sense that this wouldn't have been what they started with if it weren't for Walt Disney kind of, for lack of a better term, censoring things inside of his own company. But it's not watered down in the sense that it doesn't feel like there are no stakes and that bad things can't happen to people. I found myself really feeling for the little girl who gets kidnapped in this movie, and I have a soft spot, of course, for children. I'm a dad, but I've also kind of always had this where I don't like seeing children in danger. It bothers me. What bothers me more than just generically kids in danger is kids who are neglected and intentionally neglected, and adults that almost get off on hurting children or not giving them what they need, and that it always really bothers me. And you have that in this, where there's this villain named Medusa, who is, because of course you have to have these over-the-top villain names in Disney movies so that you will not forget who the bad guy is. So you have Medusa, and she wants a diamond, and she kidnaps a little girl who she requires simply because she is small enough to go into a cave and into a hole that goes into a cave that can retrieve this diamond. And it's in the bayou, we're in Louisiana, and there's a high tide, and she does not care if this little girl Penny ends up drowning in the process. She'll just go find, I guess she'll go find some other little girl to do this. She acts like there aren't anymore, and this is her only chance at the diamond, which is kind of weird. I didn't understand why she didn't say, let's just go kidnap some other little girl, whatever. And so Penny's been kidnapped from an orphanage, and she keeps sending bottles out. And this is apparently an aspect of the books that they borrowed, or that they adapted, where you've got a little girl who is in danger, and she's sending out messages in bottles, hoping that somebody will come and rescue her. And the people who, or I should say animals, the mice, who just happen to find this bottle, are part of an organization of a rescue society that is in the same area. This is a really fun component to this, as the United Nations. They have like their own mice United Nations, but instead of trying to solve world problems, they're trying to solve smaller problems by sending out agents to do missions to help people in need. And Penny got really lucky that the people who, or I guess the creatures that happen to find her letter are people that are specifically looking for, missions like this one. And so they send out a couple of mice who are one who is just a member of this organization, this kind of posh lady who is really naive and kind of thinks everything's always going to work out and doesn't seem to really be afraid of anything, doesn't really have a care in the world. She's this real charming kind of character, and she's voiced by Ava Gabor from Green Acres, and she teams up with the janitor, I think just because the janitor likes her and supports her when she takes on this mission, and she's like, oh, I should take you, I guess just because he's got a good heart or whatever. And so they really complement each other and fill in each other's blanks, and so he kind of grounds her, but she helps him develop some confidence, and they develop a little bit of a romance through the movie, but it's not a typical like plug-in for the formula for a romance. There's not that moment where like you've been waiting for them the whole movie to kiss and then that finally happens. The film is really subtle on that point, where he has a crush on her and she clearly is also attracted to him, but is kind of just, I think, waiting for him to finally, make a move, but also to, gain a little bit of that confidence, because I don't think she would really date a guy who is as, for lack of a better word, mousy as this guy is, and so that does kind of happen throughout the course of the film. And I think there's kind of also little subtle character arcs that happen with them. Like, this is a real simple adventure story. It's not it's not a real literary kind of narrative, of course. It's really as simple as little girl's in trouble. These rescue mice go to rescue her, and there certainly are stakes, and you certainly care about this little girl. But there's not much deeper to the story than bad guy wants a diamond, forces a little girl to try to get it for her. That little girl could die in the process, and these might save her. The end. But the little girl, I would say, is not really the protagonist of the piece. I think she is, more the device to make the story happen, but she is a sympathetic supporting character, certainly. And it's the mice themselves that are the protagonists, and if they have any character arc at all, it's just in a little bit of self-discovery throughout the hero's journey of the movie. But I hesitate to say hero's journey because it's not traditional, like Greek mythology hero's journey. There's no point where, well, I say that, I was going to say there's no point where they resist the call. I suppose Bernard does, the janitor mouse. He definitely does. If anybody has the traditional hero's journey, what you think of when you think of that, I guess it is that guy. And maybe the idea is supposed to be that he is the real central protagonist, and he's the guy who has the opportunity for change, and she has to kind of help get him there. Her name is escaping me at this very moment. Bianca. But I kind of saw both of them having opportunities to give up, or like things are getting more difficult than they expected it to. And as it goes along, he is again finding his confidence and learning to maybe lighten up a little bit and take more risks. And she kind of has the opposite, where she has to learn to kind of ground herself more, and that she's not prepared for everything that might happen to her, and they meet somewhere in the middle. That's kind of how I saw it, is sort of a dual protagonist story. But anyway, getting into the animation side a little bit, this is a movie that intentionally cuts corners a little bit. Disney at this period had like A movies and B movies, where they would sink more money and time and manpower into certain projects over others. So this was more in that B category, and it looks good, but there are, like I said, some cut corners. So you have a lot of still backdrops. You have a lot of moving characters on top of what looks like watercolor paintings, or maybe oil paintings, but I think it looks more watercolory, and there's not a lot of stuff moving in the background. And in fact, the opening sequence, the credits, really moody credit sequence with this storm that's raging, and this really sad kind of melancholy song. You've got just a lot of zoom ins and zoom outs and Ken Burns effects, and just cutting back and forth between different still images, and it's oddly effective. Like, at first I found myself in, again, the editing is very 70s, and some of it seems a little bit gimmicky, where it's like, I don't know why we're zooming in right now, I don't know why that's necessary. It almost would have been better to just like do a slideshow, or maybe some like real soft pans. But there's some of this like quick moving in real fast, like zoom ins that it does, where that's just really indicative of the period. But at first I found myself going, okay, we don't have a lot of money for this movie, and so we're not animating anything. And after a while, it started to feel like a real stylistic choice. And I was won over on it pretty quickly, where it felt like I was in a storybook. So you have, fully moving characters on top of a lot of barely moving or totally still backdrops. And for whatever reason, it really works. I thought it was really effective for the particular story that was being told here. There's some places where it's oddly derivative of other Disney movies that had come before, and the obvious comparison with Medusa is Cruella de Vil, and I was surprised to find in the 5 minutes of cursory research I did before making this video that Cruella de Vil was originally intended to be the villain of this movie, that they were actually going to make this a sequel to 101 Dalmatians, and watching it, there's no reason at all it couldn't have been in that universe. And I almost wish that they had done it that way, but I guess the idea was we don't really know if we want to make sequels. Somewhat ironic given that this became the first movie to get a sequel with the Disney animated theatrical features. And it was just decided that these two things shouldn't be in the same universe, and that they didn't know if they wanted to make sequels. And what's weird is Medusa ends up feeling like just a low rent, kind of cheap version to me anyway of Cruella de Vil. She doesn't have that same kind of presence. She's as nasty, but not as much fun to watch. And she just seemed like a kind of knockoff of the dollar store version of that character to me, and that was a little bit of a shame. Like, she even drives nearly the same car that Cruella de Vil does. It would have been kind of neat, in my mind. Maybe a little too novel, maybe a little too gimmicky, but it might have been neat if it had been the same character, because she's just too similar. And it also has crocodiles that are like, now I can't remember if they're crocodiles or alligators in Peter Pan, but they're kind of like the ones in Peter Pan. They have a similar like sinister smiles as the Hook's pet crocodiles in that. So there's some things that are kind of derivative here and there in this. I really enjoyed watching this. This is certainly a thing that I would show my kids. It's I think the third act is actually probably the best part of the whole movie. I wasn't as into some of the pratfall humor and stuff as I was the places where characters were in like real serious danger, because I was surprised by the real weight and gravitas to all of that. And I also liked the somber tone through this movie. There's this odd thing that this does where it's not a musical, but it's one of those Disney movies, and we made more of these later, but it's one of these Disney movies where there are a lot of songs with words, but none of our characters are singing them. So we don't break into song. It's not a musical. But there is, with this, you sort of like, I guess, Phil Collins with Tarzan. You get some kind of on the nose musical numbers with a woman singing about what exactly is happening, but it's kind of odder with this, and I like the music in this. Again, like really indicative of the period, but there's this kind of like sad lady's voice singing to characters that are downtrodden and having a hard time, and sounding like she's trying to reconcile them, even though or reconcile them, that she's trying to make them feel better, even though they comfort them. They don't know that they're being sung to, so it's all in the second person, and it's like we're singing to a character that doesn't know that they're being sung to, which is odd, and it took me a while to warm up to. But like I said, I think it creates a really nice melancholy atmosphere. It put me in a real specific kind of unique mood. Another thing that I had a hard time wrapping my mind around, because I just think too much about this kind of thing, I think I read too much into this, But I couldn't help myself because it just seemed inconsistent to me. Is I don't fully understand how anthropomorphized animals work in this universe, where they're able to speak to human beings, but it's like conveniently, if human beings aren't paying attention to them, they just don't hear them. So I don't know if the idea is supposed to be that children can always talk to these animals. There is a cat that is talking to and comforting this little girl at the orphanage, who is afraid that nobody's ever going to adopt her and nobody cares about her. And that was the stuff that really resonated with me and kind of hit me. And like I said, I have a really tough time, and that's not me criticizing this when I say I don't like seeing this. I was glad this is what this movie was about, but it just, it makes me kind of heartbroken when I see this kind of thing, where there's this little girl who is not only being ignored and just is kind of invisible, and her parents are gone and she'll never see them again, uh, and she's just waiting to be adopted and is afraid it'll never happen. But the woman that kidnaps her is also telling her that she's worthless, and the only thing she's good for is being thrown into small spaces to get a diamond that she might drown to get, but who cares, because all she's good for is attempting to get this, pirate treasure out of a skull in a cave. And who would want you? And it's really sad. But anyway, so there's this cat that talks to her at the beginning, and then she's able to hear these mice. But when the mice are talking to her in this cave with sound that absolutely resonates, because it's cave acoustics. Medusa up top, who can hear the little girl every time she yells up to her, never hears the mice and never asks the little girl who she's talking to. And I just kind of wondered if it was sort of like what the logic was, if the idea is, because very often in things like this the idea is the animals can talk to each other, but if they try to talk to a person, they'll just hear bow wow or meow or squeak or whatever, depending on the animal. And in this, it's kind of more like the logic in um what is the name of that movie? Charlotte's Web, where uh, Charlotte is able to. Well, actually, no, I guess it's not there either. I was gonna say where like Charlotte can talk to the little girl and Wilbur, but I don't think that's true. Actually, I think they just talk to each other. I don't think they do talk to any human beings, right? Am I right about that? I think so. It's been a while since I've seen that. But anyway, I'm trying to think of something else that does that, where you've got animals that will talk to children, but human beings can't just like don't understand them more conveniently. They just never notice that they're talking to each other. I just thought that was a little inconsistent, because if that was supposed to be the idea, a point could have been made of that it's just for whatever reason you need a like you need to be childlike in order to be able to hear these animals. But I don't think that was really the idea. I think just conveniently the humans never happened to the adult humans never happened to hear the animals talking. So that was a little bit odd, but I'm certainly feeling this movie. I don't think this would have been a favorite of mine or anything, even if I had grown up with it. But it's a solid adventure film, and like I said, I certainly enjoyed the protagonist, and I cared about the little girl. I guess I felt like there could have been a bigger point made at the end of the little girl finally getting adopted, because that's what she's most wanting. And I get that she's not necessarily or not exactly the central protagonist, but and I don't want to rewrite the story or anything, but I felt like it had a little bit of a rushed ending where you get, and I appreciate that it's not super long. It's like an hour and 20-minute movie, and I don't think it needed to be much longer than that with the premise and the basic story outline. But when you get to the end, you're figuring, okay, the little girl is probably going to get adopted. And I figured the mice were going to somehow be involved in that. And maybe they were, but it's not really talked about. We just get a news anchor at the end when the rescue society is watching TV, and they say that the little girl got adopted, and so that you can have your Disney happy ending. Okay, good. Somebody cares about this little girl. She's going to be taken care of now. But what the little girl really wants and what she really needs, the real rescuing, is she needs a family. If if she just goes back to the orphanage and she's never adopted, then something like this could happen to her again, or it could happen to any little girl that is in this kind of situation. And so I really wanted it to be a double entendre thing. I wanted the rescuers to rescue the little girl from this immediate physical conflict, but also to rescue her in a more permanent way, in that they managed to find a family for her. And I just wanted to see them be directly involved in that. It's not bad that we don't see that. I just think that it would have made for a little bit of a tighter narrative, character-wise and thematically, and it would have been nice if the mice had acknowledged, earlier in the movie, okay, this little girl really needs a family. Like, after we rescue her, our job's not done yet. I kind of wanted that scene, and they do really feel for her, and they sympathize, and they seem to really appreciate and understand children to some degree. But that would have really driven it home for me on a narrative level anyway. But that's all I have to say about it. Thanks again to John for asking me to talk about this movie, and I'll try to have another request for you soon. I am on kind of semi-hiatus right now. I am just a couple, 3 weeks away from my twin daughters being born, and so I'm having to gear up for that, and pretty soon I'm not going to have time to make very many videos at all. Even during the hiatus, I may put a thing out here and there if I'm able to, but I just want to let everybody know that's put in a request that I'm doing what I can, but here in a bit, I won't be able to promise getting these out once a week or even a couple times a month, like I've been trying to do lately, getting as many of these out as I'm able to. So I will try to do some more if I can before I'm on, full-blown hiatus. But anyway, that's all I've got. So thanks a lot for watching, and I will see you again real soon with another one. I was Captain Logan, and thanks for watching. Bye, folks.